Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our 8th season of Conversations in the Future of Work. As always, I'm joined by really fascinating guests who have their hands in the honeypot in terms of their specific industry, role, profession, and perspective. And today, I'm really excited to welcome a special guest, Ashli Carter. Welcome to the show, Ashli.
Thanks for having me, Rachel. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, Ashli, you and I were introduced at one of the dinners that Virtual Sapien hosted in New York because you are colleagues and friends with Rachel, right? Our other Rachel.
Yeah, you guys probably have the same thing I do with a name like Ashli. There's so many of us, but yes, the other Rachel. Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. It's never been a problem, but like recently, obviously, now that we have two Rachels on the team, it's like Rachel C and Rachel R, and Rachel founder and Rachel, coach, and it's keeps things both like simple, but then also complex, right? So, but anyways, would you like to share a little bit with our audience in terms of your background and what you're most excited about these days?
Yeah. So day to day, I'm an educator. I teach at a business school here in New York, and I teach on topics surrounding leadership, working in groups and teams. I would say my particular focus is really looking at the mindsets that we bring to different situations, really hoping to build more self-awareness so that we can have more agency to really understand what mindsets are helping us, what mindsets get in the way, and bringing in a bit of choice and intentionality to the mindsets that we bring to different situations. So I do that in my teaching. I speak at organizations and leaders in a coaching capacity as well.
Awesome. So I know that a lot of your work also has touched on, you have a good amount of really fascinating research, and then you do a lot of work in like the negotiation space, like some of these more challenging conversations, right?
That's right.
And at least in my experience, I find that many leaders think that negotiation is something that happens in like formal deal scenarios, right? But really, right, negotiations happening almost like similar to sales all around us all the time. So in terms of rethinking these mindsets, how do you think we would, like, what would be a more productive way of thinking about negotiation as a part of everyday leadership?
Yeah, I think that's right. We often have this image that pops into our minds when we hear the word negotiation, and it's really formal, and we're trying to figure out the deal terms of, whatever. And that's definitely negotiation, but I think you're right in the sense that we have to engage in joint problem solving almost all the time, every single day. We need one another. And we have to figure out, how do we distribute different resources? How do we divvy up responsibilities? How do we get our needs met with one another? And so I think that if we can sort of broaden the scope of what we think about as negotiation to just joint problem solving, probably if you think about, the last 24 hours, there have been many times where you needed someone and they needed you. So I think shifting our mindset around what counts as a negotiation can actually free us up to be more creative in our joint problem solving and just to demystify the process. We're practicing this day in and day out, and we can all get better at it. So I like to sort of shift that narrative a little bit, because oftentimes if you're thinking about it in those very formal terms, then some often unhelpful goals can get triggered of, I'm trying to win, or it's a fight. And often those sorts of stories limit our creativity, which is kind of the thing that we need.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Thinking of joint problem solving, collaboratively finding a solution versus, right, to your point, winning or like zero sum. Someone comes away a winner, the other person necessarily comes away as a loser, right? Like that's always going to at least leave one person feeling not so good. So that's a really interesting perspective. It's funny because I think about my like 2-year-old.
Yes. Probably negotiating all the time.
Constant negotiation. It's literally hilarious, and you have to, it's just funny, right? Because you're dealing in many situations also with adults, you're dealing with people who are, you don't quite know how they're going to behave or react, right? And I think that's where some of the anxiety comes in of like, wanting to move forward or place the chip on the table that is going to lead ideally, right, to that joint problem solving and collaborative solution. But you're not, it's like there can be such a fear in putting a stake in the ground when you're like, is this person going to literally, in the case of my 2-year-old, dissolve into complete hysterics in the middle of the supermarket, or like what's going to happen?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think with negotiation, we want to sort of free ourselves up because you do need energy, you need creativity, as I mentioned, but you also need a curiosity. I think that when you go in and we're so focused on a particular outcome, then it actually limits our ability to, um, you know, really approach it more like a puzzle, right? There are certainly times where you do need to advocate more for your needs. Sometimes it is zero sum. Often it's not, though. Often there are things that if we put in a little bit more effort, if we approach things with curiosity, we can learn more about our counterpart's needs, and there might be different ways to meet those needs while getting our own needs met. So I think it is really important to kind of it, that puzzle approach. I think is better because it's like, okay, maybe I tried this strategy and it doesn't work. If you're negotiating with your 2-year-old, maybe you try one thing and it doesn't move the needle forward. But okay, so what else can I try? What else have I learned in this conversation? So yeah, I think the things that kind of keep us flexible are often helpful when it comes to negotiating.
Right. And so would you say that that puzzle strategy is like something that could be applied even beyond like more of these negotiation style conversations to like any difficult conversation?
Yeah, I think so because the reason why I like the sort of puzzle approach is that it sort of gives us permission that you probably aren't going to nail it at the first try or maybe not the second try, but you have sort of a willingness to, approach the problem, whatever the problem is. And I think one thing that's very similar about negotiations to any sort of difficult conversation, or maybe it's not a difficult conversation, but you care and you don't know exactly how it's going to land. We can also qualify that as maybe an uncertain conversation or a conversation that requires a bit of courage. There's sort of what's at the surface, and that's a great starting point, but we want to be willing to sort of go beneath the surface. There are many strategies that we employ to get our needs met. Sometimes we agree with one another's strategies or requests or ask. Sometimes we don't. But to sort of recognize that there's something driving that approach, I think that's where we start to get into the realm of possibility. Like, what's the underlying need? And then we can get somewhere. So it requires learning. And so that's why I do like to use that puzzle metaphor.
Right. I like that. And what happens when you like really come to an impasse? If like, yeah, it's not going
Yeah,
anywhere.
it's not going anywhere. I mean, sometimes you walk away, like
Yeah.
that,
Right.
that's okay. We have that option. I think, you know, the way that everything is now is so dynamic, is ever changing. Everything really needs to be based on context, whatever your strategy is. So I think, almost anything that I teach nowadays, it's not so much about the right or wrong approach, but it's more so at least I've decided what my approach is. I've had a moment of pause to think about how do I define success here? Okay, how do I define success in ways that are within my control? What are my hopes and dreams for this conversation? Realizing that I may or may not get there. In the realm of negotiation, this is why it's really powerful when we have alternatives, because it frees us up to walk away if it's not working. So I think we just need to be really clear about why do I need this person and for what? And what is within my own realm of agency? Can I get my needs met elsewhere? So it is a bit of a balance between being honest with yourself of, yes, I've put in the work and the effort and I have tried and I've shown up and I've gotten curious and I've asked questions. And even if, it's felt like the first three questions didn't yield anything. I showed up again with maybe a different strategy. So it's a balance between that and also knowing what are my limits and honoring those commitments as well. So
Right.
it's much easier said than done, I will say.
Oh,
But I
yeah.
think that's why it's helpful to think of negotiation, to think of joint problem just more broadly, because it can be challenging, but we have so many opportunities to practice what
Mhm.
showing up for ourselves and others, what that actually looks like. So it's definitely a muscle that we
Yes.
build. It's
Yes.
definitely a muscle.
Yes, I love that. I mean, obviously at Virtual Sapiens, a big part of what people use our platform for is to practice some of these difficult conversations with an
Right.
AI persona and to have it be in a safe environment. And, it can really help you do some of that reflective work where you're like, okay, I actually went into that conversation and I had no idea what my limit was and I had no idea what my walking away point was. And, you know, it came out in the way that the conversation, okay, so let's try it again. And this time, like, I actually have spent some time thinking about that and how is that going to impact the conversation we have. And it really is fascinating how, depending on how you set up the context of the role play and the AI avatar, how realistically the AI will engage with you, and how well you can use a tool like that to develop these muscles, which I think in learning a lot of the times, and I'm sure you see this in academia a lot, but people are exposed to knowledge or a new concept or whatever, and they're like, okay, it's in my head, I got it. And you're like, no, it's got to be like, it's really got to be in your body. It's got to be in your ability to recall that framework or that value set, or to speak from that position of value. It really takes time and massaging, I think. And I think that
I
that's
think
often
so.
missing.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually one of the things that frustrates me the most.
Mm.
That I think that certainly you can see it in academia, but I think you see this elsewhere too, because I think it feels so gratifying to understand a concept in theory or intellectually. I think we forget sometimes that the practice of learning, real learning, like if you're really stretching, if you're really trying something new, there's aha moments, those feel great, but that's not the only part of the process. I think sometimes we forget that learning can feel painful at times, particularly if we really care and feel connected to the thing that we're trying to incorporate. And so I think actually so much of my job is to create the conditions, the container for people to feel like, okay, I can dip my toe. I can actually try, even if I'm not 100%. And it's really trying to extend that invitation and just making it's okay if you stumble. And in fact, even better if you stumble and then you reflect and sort of get curious about, okay, so what went well, what didn't go so well, and what might I try a bit differently. One of the themes of a course that I'm teaching right now is on this very thing, which is developing not just wisdom, but practical wisdom. And so I think if wisdom is not contextualized in our day to day behavior, to me, don't get me wrong, I have been in academia. I love ideas. I think it can give a nice little ego boost when we feel very fluent in ideas and we stay in that space. But we have more to do. There are many opportunities. There are challenges out there, and it really requires our courage. And so, yeah, I think, whatever tools that we can use that help close, sometimes they call that the knowing doing gap. Whatever can help close
Yeah.
that, I'm all for. Um, the other side of it, though, sometimes people are like, okay, I'm really great. I'm feeling better about the practice piece. And then that becomes the new thing to prevent actually going out there. So I think we just have to continue to be creative and clever with our strategies, because I think left to our own devices, we're very good at sort of running away. So
Totally.
it requires some honesty and some support to show up.
Do you have students or clients who, when either being presented a new strategy or mindset, or being invited to try on a new behavior or way of, communicating, do you ever get people who are like, oh, that's just not me? It doesn't feel authentic.
Oh, all the time.
Like
All the time.
when it's new specifically, right? To your point of like, yeah, well, it is going to take a little bit of discomfort to actually really even try this on to see if you can
Yeah,
find a way to make it authentic.
absolutely. I think something that's really it's ironic, but it sort of keeps me committed to sort of feeling like, okay, this is important. I teach a lot about practicing a growth mindset. And it's really interesting because even though a growth mindset is about really sort of the belief in the moment, particularly in the face of challenge, that things are changeable, that, things are malleable. What's so ironic about the way that we often talk about our growth mindset, it becomes very fixed how we talk about it. And it's either or. You either have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And sort of implicit in that is you either have a bad mindset or a good mindset. And I find that oftentimes folks want to sort of categorize, well, what type of person am I? And am I the good type? Do I have the good mindset that's going to help me achieve all my dreams? So that's sort of interesting because it's sort of the opposite of what it's all about. And so I constantly have to stretch and think about new ways to present this idea in a way that I think is more accessible to us. I love, assessments and that type of thing, but I'm far less interested in diagnosis. I'm more interested in, again, building that self-awareness so that we can have agency in the moments that matter. So what does that mean? It means like if I'm, working on something that I say I care about and I have a disappointment, do I actually know where I'm operating from? Am I operating from a place of things are fixed and static and they're going to mostly stay the same? Or am I operating in this moment from a place of, I can actually maybe try something new? Or when I get praise, do I sort of bask in that and really go into the comfort zone? Sometimes we need to do that, but probably not all the time. So I often do come across resistance, but to me, that just kind of sparks my my interest more. Where I'm like, okay, so what's at the root of that resistance, and can we better understand that? It's more about getting curious about what's working for me and what's not working for me. And the great thing is we get to decide that. I think often though, if we're not having those moments of pause, reflection, curiosity, honesty, then we're sort of operating in ways that we don't even understand. We might be operating from panic and have no idea that panic is running the show. So I take it as a challenge and a worthwhile challenge when I meet resistance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I just love it. Like as a facilitator, you know, I get that question a lot. Of like, how do I even try on a new behavior if it's very different from what I'm used to, and how I like, you know, whether it's how I'm comfortable or at least how I like in some cases identify, you know, and you're like, oh well, like let's go to the go back to like the intention or the goal that you have, and do the behaviors that you have now, are they in support of that, or are they maybe holding you back from even achieving that, right? And so then it's fast. I agree, though. It's really interesting, very interesting work. So I wanted to talk about some of your research briefly, because you explore this concept of forest versus trees thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that concept, and then also how shifting between like big picture and more detailed thinking can change like decision making for leaders, certainly, but then also just for anyone?
Yeah. So, we can approach any situation really sort of zooming out, so that would be the forest, really trying to think about what's the overarching goal here? What's the meaning behind this? Why am I engaging in this behavior? What does this mean for who I am, my core values, the long term, right? So that's more of kind of a big picture forest approach. But we can also really zoom in to the details and really think about not so much why am I doing this, but what's the step-by-step how of making this happen? What do I need to do in the short term? So there's these different modes of thinking. And by the way, we need both of these, and we all shift between these different modes of thinking. And so I'm often interested in getting curious about what do we default to, sort of more big picture, more short term, and how does that impact, say, how we react to challenges or bad news. But also more recently, I've gotten curious about, we can all do both modes of thinking, and we do. But are certain folks stereotyped as being the big picture thinkers, and are some folks stereotyped as being more detail oriented? And within organizations, how might that shape what opportunities you get access to? If someone thinks, you're a young person, you can only really think about the short term, well, that might limit some of your opportunities to be more strategic or to share your big picture vision. I'm interested in those different modes and how they play out in different ways.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. I do think, to your point, you'd need probably frequently, even with one particular scenario or problem, you would benefit from employing both of those, like the larger kind of more contextual, and then like the much more nitty gritty, like step by step or whatever other detailed kind of components are a part of it. I feel like that would be, like, I think about the way we communicate what we do at Virtual Sapiens to our audience, and I think it's super easy to get stuck in the detailed nitty gritty, and then there's a big gap between where your audience is, because they're certainly not living in the weeds of the technology, right? They're living with like the people and the problems and and so you have to, even from a marketing perspective, I think this concept is relevant.
Totally. It's interesting because I think, being sort of flexible in our approach, sometimes they call that, the ambidexterity of the way that we construe different situations. But it's similar to, what we were talking about with negotiations. There's no one right approach. And even in one single negotiation or one single company message, you probably need to be dynamic, and you really need to know what is the context here. What stage am I in? And okay, if I have that awareness of what stage I'm in, what my goal is, then I can better craft a message, say, maybe around the big picture goals. Or, if we're really in an implementation stage, then we need to get down to the details and the process. I think also, too, just knowing yourself, I think I'm someone who loves to think very big picture. And knowing that sometimes I can skip over the details, or I can get lost in the big picture, right? There's a different type of lost. You can get lost in the details, but you can also get sort of lost in the grand vision.
For sure. Yeah.
And so, sometimes sort of checking myself of like, wait a second, I need to zoom in a bit. I need to sort of go step by step, or I need to bring in people, collaborators, folks on my team who have different strengths, who are able to revert back into the details there. So much of, I think, the leadership piece and getting more familiar with our minds is, again, building the awareness so that we know, okay, what's the goal and what tool matches where I am right now, what the context is, what my goal is.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Constant balancing act and like tug of war a little bit. So just to switch gears for our final kind of topic, I'm curious, we spoke about this a little bit before starting to record, but how do you see AI changing the way people learn leadership and communication skills?
Mm-hmm. I think it does. The first thing that, pops into my mind when I think about the ways that I utilize AI in the classroom or in workshops, when I think about virtual sapiens, I think that one thing that can be really beneficial about utilizing AI in the scope of developing our leadership skills is that it can give folks the space and the opportunity and the access to build more reps, just to get the practice, to generate many ideas, to produce things quickly. So I think in that way, it's quite helpful. I think some of the risk that I'm starting to see, with students, professionals too, actually, is so what do we do with those reps? And still, we need to kind of learn the discernment of which ideas are better, which strategies land more appropriately given our audience. So I think that humans, we still need to get better at noticing and naming the context that we're in, noticing and naming the values that we subscribe to, and articulating our vision. What's our goal here? And then utilizing AI as a tool to enhance that versus the other way around. I think sometimes what can happen is if we outsource sort of those deeper questions
Yeah.
to AI, then I think we're a bit in trouble. But if we are, taking the time to get really clear on what is it that I care about, what are my priorities, and then how can I utilize this tool to help me get there, then I think that is sort of the sweet spot for using AI. And I guess we'll see how it plays out. But certainly that's how I'm encouraging people to use these tools.
Yeah, you mentioned time, taking the time to sit and think and reflect and try to figure out some of what you're feeling or how you're thinking about something. And it's interesting because AI is like, oh, we can do everything faster now. We can do everything faster now. Here's 50,000 ideas, whatever. And so you would think, you're like, great, so now you have more time. And I just feel like, as we all know, that's just not actually how things happen, right? We end up filling that time with other action-oriented, tasky things, right? Versus like the sitting and the reflecting. And so I do think that will continue to be a challenge for many people,
I
right?
think so. And maybe, time is one way to characterize it, but maybe a better word would be take the space or create the space to check in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, I find that's a big part of my job when I'm teaching or facilitating is just providing a container for people to do that work. I think what I often see is that people are hungry for it. They really want the space to check in with themselves. I think it can be difficult to create that space for ourselves.
Yeah.
One, we are limited in time, energy, resources, things like that. But I think even in the ideal situation, sometimes because there's no easy answer and it's no like right answer either. So I think
Right.
sometimes that can make it a little bit like, I want to know, I want to have that clarity around what I value and what I envision, but it can feel really scary to sort of go there. Um, and so, I think it, all or nothing thinking is so tempting for all of us. We were talking about resistance earlier. But often, it's kind of like maybe this doesn't 100% work for me, but like, what are the pieces that I can take with me? What are the bits that actually can be helpful to me? And so I think the same thing with thinking about like the space or the time to reflect and check in. It could be this like whole spiritual journey. It doesn't have to be, but I think we can sort of find pockets where we can reconnect with ourselves and build those. If we can build like a ritual or a routine or just a regular process of connecting with ourselves, and I think we would be much better off. And I think we could probably leverage these tools, such as AI, much better if we know, like, where am I going? Like, why am I using this tool? What is it helping me with?
Totally. Well said. Awesome. Lots to think about, Ashli. I love it. I'm like, I need to go create some space. That's great. So, as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience, or in particular, if our audience would like to follow more of your work, like what's the best way they can do that?
Ooh. That is a great question. I'm hoping to do more conversations like this, so I'll keep you posted. My name is Ashli B. Carter. I'm easily found on the internets, as they say. But yeah, I think just if I could give anyone encouragement, I think it's often change and growth is possible, but it doesn't mean that you have to choose change and growth every single time. You get to decide when that is the strategy that you want to take. So I hope that we can get a little less bogged down in the type of person that we are and these categories and labels, and really get more curious about, when we're making decisions, when we're choosing behaviors, knowing where it's coming from so that we can own our choice, whatever
Yes.
it is. We can choose the comfort zone, like that's okay, but we want to know that's what we're choosing. We can choose growth and learning when we decide to.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your perspective with us. It's really fascinating. And I think that this leaves our audience with a lot to think about. So thank you. And thanks to our audience for tuning in.
Thanks so much, Rachel. So cool to chat with you.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Bye, everyone. See you next time.